In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this guide rail, which can be used with a power saw to break down sheet goods. Hello, my name is Bob, and welcome once again to another episode on the White Dog Garage YouTube channel. Cutting up sheet goods, sheets of plywood or MDF for example, can be a trial, especially if you're working on your own like I am. Here in Australia, the common size for sheet goods is 2400 by 1200 or 8 foot by 4 foot, and larger sheets can be had as well as smaller ones. Getting them cut up at your supplier can be the easy way out, as you'll have more manageable sizes to move. Now, anybody who's carried a full 2400 by 1200 sheet will know what I mean, and it can cost more. And it can also lead to questions like, what dimension do you give them? Slightly over, and when you get it home you trim it back, or spot on and you hope that their attention to detail and their tape measure matches yours. However, there is a type of table saw called a panel saw specifically designed for the purpose of cutting large sheets. If you watch, for example, King Post Timberworks YouTube channel, particularly where Joey builds a plywood kitchen, and I'll give you a link in the description, you can see an example, a good example of this type of machine in action. But the prices for those machines are north of $4,000 US, and honestly you would need to be doing a lot of sheet goods to justify the purchase. You can use a table saw. Best way is to have a team of two and large in-feed and out-feed tables. But typically the fence won't extend to cover large widths, and trying to track the line whilst you push the sheet through against the saw blade can introduce waver in the cut. Another alternative is a track saw. Peter Millard on the 10-Minute Workshop YouTube channel uses the Festool one regularly. His video, How to Make a Birch Ply Banquet, Part 1, which I'll have a link for in the description, gives a good overview of its use. And even better, more recently he's put up a series on track saws called the Track Saw Workshop, and I'll have a link for that in the description as well. And it is well worth watching, even if all you're going to do is make a guide rail, which is what I'm going to do. I've been cutting plywood for years with the power saw, and I'm pretty good at following a straight line, but that may not suit your style. If it is supercritical, I'll use a straight edge to buttress the power saw during the cut, but when doing this I started thinking about whether I should actually have a dedicated guide rail. Recently I found a pile of melamine offcuts in my storage and decided I would use some of it to make a guide rail. It's really simple to build, and to be honest I wonder why I've not made one sooner. I'm going to use my 185mm Makita power saw with this guide rail, and the key measurement I need to know is the distance from the blade to the back edge of the foot. But first I need to cut a strip from the board to use as a backrest for the rail. This doesn't need to be particularly wide, and in my case I make it 100mm. The front of the board has a machine cut and banded edge, and I want this for the backrest. This provides a hard-wearing surface for the foot of the saw to rest against when cutting using the guide rail. I then drill a series of holes through the backrest, which I will use to mount it to the guide board. The backrest is initially set back from the edge of the guide board by the blade to saw foot edge measurement plus a margin. In my case I'm using 10mm, so I've added that to the distance, and then I screw the two boards together. I then clamp the rail to the bench, and positioning the foot of the power saw against the backrest board, proceed to cut away the excess board on the rail. The resulting cut edge is now the inside edge of any saw cut that will be made with the rail. This is the essence of the power saw guide rail in its simplest form. To demonstrate this, I mark out a cut I want to make on a piece of ply and then position the guide rail against these marks, clamping it in place and making the cut. Okay, we've made our guide rail. We can leave it at this, or we can make a few extra refinements, and that's what I'm going to show you now, what I've done to just make it a little easier to work with. Depending on the depth of the cut, if the rail is being held by ordinary clamps, the body of the power saw may strike them as it passes over. Potentially this can affect the cut, so the first thing that I want to do is make some low profile clamps, and for this purpose I'm modifying a pair of quick release clamps. I do this by removing the fixed arm, cutting off 80 millimeters of the rail, and then welding it back on at right angles to the rail. An alternate method to low profile clamps is to leave a lip on the other side of the backrest to the cut edge. Clamps are applied to the lip, but I'm not fond of that approach, as you end up with a clamp further away from the cutting edge, and which is more likely to tip the guide rail up, resulting in a cut that is slightly out of square. My next modification is to fit a removable T-section to one side of the rail. Provided the side of the sheet is straight, this means you will only have to measure one side before making a square cut across the sheet. Here I've already cut my T-section along with the locating piece which will rest against the rail. First I temporarily fix the T-piece at right angles to the guide. I then place the locating block on the T-piece, make sure it is hard up against the back of the guide rail, and then use 4 screws to fix it in position. The T-piece is meant to be removable, and to make sure it remains in alignment, I'm attaching it using M6, that is 6mm diameter by 1mm pitch metric thread, countersunk metal thread screws into corresponding insert nuts. To do this, I first drill 2 6.5mm diameter holes through both the T-piece and the guide rail, before removing the T-piece and then drilling out the corresponding holes in the guide rail to 9mm, and finally screwing in the insert nuts. As proof of the pudding, here I am cutting a 150mm wide strip off this piece of MDF sheet, marking the distance only at the leading edge. In making this cut, I also cut off the overhang at the front of the T-piece, and it is really not required. I check and the resulting piece is 150mm at both ends, so I'm satisfied the T-piece is fit for purpose. Moving on, the final modification will be to fit some rubber strips to the underside of the guide rail to prevent slipping. The theory being that these fitted, I might not need to clamp the guide rail every time I use it. To fit the strips, I'm routing a rebate 10mm in from each side of the undersurface of the rail. I got the idea to fit these strips after watching Peter Millard's tracksaw series, where it is a feature of the tracksaw tracks. With the rebates done, it's just a matter of gluing down the rubber strips. In Peter Millard's tracksaw series, he talks at length about the Splinter Guard, which is a rubber strip fitted to the front of the tracksaw rail. In effect, the Splinter Guard for the guide rail is the sawn edge of the rail. With the tracksaw, the Splinter Guard is made of rubber and does the same job, but as well, it provides a buffer zone to the aluminium frame of the rail, as well as easily accommodating any variations in manufacture that is not needed here on the guide rail. Okay, so there we have it, finished guide rail. I have cut the slide to suit my saw. With your saw, if you were making this, you again, as shown in the video, would need to trim it to suit. I have made some low profile clamps, quick action, that I can easily clamp down the guide rail for use. I've put a removable T-section so that I can easily just slide it into position and make a straight cut. I've added rubber strips. I'm liking these a lot because once you put it in place, certainly if they're new, it doesn't move. You may not need these clamps. The guide rail, I made it 1,660 millimetres long. Nothing magic about that distance. That was merely the length of the piece of timber that I had. I may yet cut it down. It may end up a bit too wide, but I will see as I use it. You could make it 2,400 millimetres long or 8 foot long, but personally I don't make many lengthways cuts on these boards, certainly not full length cuts, and so I don't see a great need for it in my case, but certainly if you had a need for that, you would merely make a longer board. You'd have a longer board to start with. Process is the same. But for me, this length is manageable, and as I say, I may in future cut it down a little. So, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I would welcome a thumbs up. And please, share it amongst your friends. This channel is about making, maintaining, fixing and restoration projects. And if you like that sort of stuff, and you haven't already subscribed, well, how about subscribing? It's easy. Hit the bar down below. While you're there, ding the bell so that you're reminded by YouTube every time a new video comes out. Thank you once again for watching.